Hey guys, welcome back. So in the previous video, we were working inside of our light blueprint, our blueprint class, and we set it up so that when the player enters our box collision here, our trigger, the light comes on, and when they exit, it goes off. And we also created another instance of it really quickly, actually, just by dragging out a copy inside of our level here. So we have two instances that we were able to create really quickly of our blueprint. And both of them just worked. We didn't have to provide any functionality, any extra functionality to get that second copy to work. So if I play in the editor, this light works as soon as we enter our volume, it comes on. And we also can enter this one as well, and that one comes on, and when we leave, it goes off, just as we expected. Did want to mention, if you actually accidentally fall off the level and are just falling in space like this and you're completely new to Unreal Engine, go ahead and hit escape. That will get you out of the play session there, and you could just play again. I guess I should have mentioned that in a previous video, because it is kind of a bit of a tight space back here. Plus, it's fun to watch them fall off. Get out of here. So let's go ahead and continue, actually. In this video, what we're going to do is allow the player to enter our trigger volume here. And instead of the light coming on automatically, we're going to allow the player to press a button to turn that light on or off, but only when they are inside of our trigger volume. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's go ahead and open up our light blueprint. So far, we have been working inside of the content browser to go ahead and open up our light blueprint just by double clicking on it. But there's other ways to get to this particular blueprint as well. We can select it inside of our level here, and then over in the details panel, there's a big blue button that says Edit Blueprint. We can actually open up this blueprint from this button as well. So if I click this, we're going to get a drop-down menu with a bunch of different options. There's some stuff for instance modifications and creating child class blueprints, etc. We're not going to worry about any of these for now. They're a little bit outside the scope of the introduction to blueprints. All we're really worried about is opening the blueprint editor or adding or editing script. Now, in both cases, for our particular instance, because we have a node network set up already, both of these will take us to the event graph. If you had just created a blueprint and placed it in your level and you don't have any components or anything in it, opening the blueprint editor would probably open it to the viewport so that you can add components to it. And then this option here, as the tooltip says, will open the blueprint editor for this asset directly at the event graph. So either one of these will be fine to open it. You can also actually go to the Blueprints button here at the main toolbar and go down to the Open Blueprint class, and we can scroll through the list of blueprints that we have in our project here. Some of these were, again, created with the starter content, but there's our light blueprint right there. You could select it from here as well, and that will also open up the blueprint in the blueprint editor. Now, what we're going to do is allow the player to provide input and toggle on our light or toggle it off. Now, how do we get started with that? We know that we only want the player to be able to press a button when they're inside of our trigger volume. So we're going to use our onComponent begin overlap and our onComponent end overlap to let us know when the player is inside of our trigger volume there. So what we're going to do is, first of all, let's disconnect our current setup that we have here, because we don't want to have our setup function this way. So let's go over to our toggle visibility here. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and while holding down the Alt key, let's hover over the executable here and see how both of our wires are highlighted here. If I left click, that's going to disconnect all the wires that are connected to this node. So it's just a handy shortcut. So far, we have been right-clicking and choosing the break link option, which does the same thing. But another just shortcut inside of Blueprint, you can easily disconnect wires just by holding down Alt and left-clicking as well. So with our script disconnected at the moment, let's left-click and drag a selection box around our spotlight and our toggle visibility. Got a mouse wheel down to zoom out a little bit. Right-click and drag and move these nodes down here for just a second. We'll get back to these in a moment. All we're really going to be focused on right now is our onComponent begin overlap and our onComponent end overlap. So we know that when the player enters our volume, we want to allow the player to provide some sort of input to turn our light on and off. So how do we get to that point? We don't have any references or anything that we can gather, so we're going to have to add a new node. We're going to drag off the executable pin here for our onComponent begin overlap. So when the player enters our volume, let's drag off our executable and let's place a new node. So I'll release. And we know that we want to provide the player a way to enter some kind of input. So let's just search for input, see what comes up. And as we search for input, due to context sensitivity, everything with input comes up. There's stuff for touch input, which is not quite what we want. So I'm going to collapse this and kind of look through our list a little bit more. And there's a couple options here, a couple functions. There's an enable input, and there's also a disable input. So I mouse over this enable input here. It says pushes this actor onto the stack of input being handled by a player controller. In essence, what this means is that the player controller, the player driving the character or battleship or whatever is being controlled in the game, is going to be used to enable input. So go ahead and select the enable input here, and that's going to add a new node for us, like so. So we have a new node, and this node is targeting an actor, and it's looking for a target, and it's currently set to self. And I kind of wanted to mention this really quickly, especially if you're not coming from a programming background. This may be a little bit confusing. What is self? What are we talking about? Well, self literally means this blueprint. We are talking about ourself. So when we say on component begin overlap and enable input on an actor, and we are saying self, we are saying allow input on this particular blueprint in our level. And below that, it's saying player controller. If I hover over it, it says the player controller whose input events we want to receive. We're actually going to work in the opposite direction for this. So we have an input that we need to provide it to. We don't want to use any of our pins over here. We're going to left click and drag off of this in the opposite direction. And we're just going to search for player controller. So let's search for player controller. Oops, if I could spell. I guess all we need to enter is player, and this gives us enough options to work with here. We don't want to necessarily create a player, but we do want to get a player controller, and it returns the player controller at the specified player index. So let's go ahead and select this get player controller, and that's going to get a reference to the player controller at the specified index. Now this is where things can get a little bit tricky, a little bit complicated, especially if we were doing this for a multiplayer situation. For a single player situation, the player index is referred to, or excuse me, not referred to, I should say, uses a zero-based sum. So when we say player index 0, we're talking about player 1. And since we only have one player, we're talking about the player playing the game. So this is going to return whoever is playing that game as the controller to allow input for. So our player that is playing the game will then be able to provide input directly to ourself, this blueprint. So with that set up, we have our enable input. Let's do the disable input now. So let's drag off this, the on component end overlap. And again, if we search for input and we hide all of our touch input, there's our enable. Let's select our disable so it removes this actor from the stack of input being handled by a player controller. Let's go ahead and select the disable input. And again, it is asking for a player controller reference. It's targeting ourself. It's all great. Let's just use our current player controller node here. Let's drag off the return value and plug that into our player controller here. So it's getting the reference in both instances. I mean, we could just as easily Control C on it and Control V to paste a copy of it and connected it like so, because they're both referencing player index 0. It's just a matter of how you'd like to work, but this works just as fine doing it like so. So our script is set up so that we can enable input when the player enters our trigger volume here. Now we need to hop down to our toggle visibility and allow the player to actually press a button to turn on and off our light. So how do we do that? Let's actually just right click inside of our graph here. And if you recall in our text, our helpful text over here that we created, a component, we said that we were going to press F to toggle. So inside of our graph here, let's right click and let's press the F key and see what we get. And right there, the first one that comes up is keyboard events. And events for when the F key is pressed or released. So let's go ahead and select the F key event here. And you're going to see we get a pressed pin and we get a released pin. All we need to worry about is the pressed pin. So let's take our pressed and plug that into the toggle visibility like so. So our script is set up. We can test this now. Let's compile and save. And I'm going to try and minimize this so I get all of it on screen if I can. Something like, well, I guess I'm going to move this over. Just drag a selection box around this and move it up here. You don't necessarily have to do this. I'm just trying to get clever with my screen space so that a script is on screen as well. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and test this now. Our script is set up. We compiled. We saved. Let's play. And right now, when I go over to our lamp blueprint here, our script is triggering. You can see it in the bottom there, triggering on and off when we enter it. If we press F, our light comes on. If I press F again, it comes off, and the script is updating. If I press F and turn it on, and I leave the trigger volume, if I try to press F again, notice that our script is not firing because we are not inside of the trigger volume. But as soon as we enter, we can press F and turn it off. Now, again, because we're using class blueprints, if we go over to this particular instance, we enter our trigger volume. Now it's not showing up inside of our script down here that we are entering and exiting it. And I'll show you why in a moment. But we can press F and it turns on and it turns off. The reason why this one is not showing up, excuse me, below in the graph down there is because we are currently looking at this instance. The instance over here, we are currently viewing that instance inside of our graph here. But if I hold Shift and F1, it's going to give me mouse control to get back to my mouse control here. And it's going to have to slide this one over just a little bit more. We are currently debugging this particular instance, the light_BP. If I click this drop down, you can see that we have a second reference. That is our second reference here. It's light_BP2. So if I select this one, now we are getting the visual display of what's happening with this script in the level. Just a way of debugging your blueprints. Because we have multiple instances, we need to specify which blueprint we are looking at inside of our graph here. So I just wanted to show you that really quickly, but our system is working. There's one other thing that we need to do. If you recall, our helpful text isn't currently being displayed. We need to set it up so that when we enter our volume here, our text comes up and lets us know which key we need to press, because right now the player wouldn't know otherwise. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit escape here and going to resize this a little bit. And in our components, there is our helpful text. What we're going to do is just drag that in from the components panel there. Left click and drag that into the graph. It's going to perform a getter for us. So we are getting that helpful text. And let me grab this stuff again really quickly and just move it down here like so. So off of our helpful text, just as we've been doing with our spotlight, all we want to do is toggle that visibility of our text. So we're going to drag off of helpful text here, just left click and release. And let's search for toggle visibility or toggle viz. And it's going to give us that option. So go ahead and select the toggle visibility. And let's move it up just a little bit so that when we enter our trigger, we're going to enable input, and we're also going to turn our helpful text on. So let's make a connection between this executable and this executable here. Then we need to do the opposite for when the player leaves the trigger volume. So when I leave the trigger volume, disable input, and again, call that toggle visibility. So let's left click and drag and plug it in here like so. And I keep moving you around screen space. So let me move you down here maybe. Okay, we are set. I'm just moving things around just for the sake of vanity so the wires aren't crossing all over the place. I know this one's crossing, but I think that's good. So we are set now. When we enter, enable input, show the helpful text. We can press F and turn on our light. When we exit, disable input and remove our helpful text. So let's compile and save. And let's test this if I can make it all fit. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Let me actually move these nodes over just a little bit too. There we go. So let's test this. I'm going to play in the editor here. And we are currently looking at BP2 in our debug here. So let's switch that to BP, the light_BP. So there's our text. Press F to toggle. I'm going to hit F. It's on. As soon as I leave, the text goes away. I can no longer press F to turn it off. So it is working exactly as we expected. And just for the sake of a full view, I'm going to dock it up here for a second. So when we approach it, press F to toggle. Okay, I'll press F and it comes on. Same with the one back here. Press F to toggle, and it works. So at this point, if you have gotten this far and it's all working exactly as my setup here, congratulations. If it is not, do not worry. Take a look at the full setup here. If you need to, actually pause for a second and make sure that your connections look similar to mine. Again, we are overlapping the trigger, enabling input, toggling the visibility of our helpful text. When we leave the trigger, we are disabling input and removing our helpful text. Only when the player is inside of the trigger volume are we allowing the ability to press F and toggle visibility of our spotlight. So the last thing that I want to do in this video before we wrap this video up and move on, I wanted to show you a handy thing you can do inside of Blueprints just for the sake of cleanliness, and it will make your life a lot easier down the road once you start working with more complex blueprints. What we're going to do is left click inside of our graph here, and we're going to drag a selection box around all of these nodes here. Not necessarily the F key, but our overlap event nodes here. And once you release and have them all selected, we're going to press C on our keyboard, C as in cat, and that's going to give us a comment box. So we can add helpful reminders of what this does for us, what this script does for us, so that we can see visually what this script does for us and not have to kind of go through our node network and say, what is this node? What does this do again? So let's add a comment. Let's add a helpful comment. We're going to say, when overlapping trigger, enable input and show helpful text. When leaving trigger, disable input and remove helpful. My comment's super long, I know. Usually you'd probably want to have smaller comments, but I'm making mine super long here, just so that it's super helpful. Disable input and remove helpful text. So you can also resize your comment boxes here. You can see mine's getting shifted down now, the text, which is a little bit better. But the cool thing with comments is if you go to the details panel here, you can change the comment color. You can actually enter the comment text there as well. But you can change the comment color by clicking this color picker here. You can change it to any color you want. So I'm going to say, let's just say blue, just because blue is pretty. And we can hit OK. And from a glance, we could see our text a little bit better now. There's some other options in here for adding a comment bubble. Whether or not to use comment bubbles or not, these will appear as little bubbles above the comment with it checked when you zoom way out, like so. And then there's also movement mode, whether or not you can move the nodes within the comment box. So if I click the header up here, you see I get this little crosshairs symbol. If I left click, I can now move that entire network around. So it just makes our life a little bit easier as we are working inside of our graph. So I'm going to do the same thing for our F press event here. I'm just going to left click and drag a selection box around it, hit C to create a comment. We're going to make this comment a lot shorter. We're just going to say, press F to toggle light. And over in the details, let's change this to a lovely shade of reddish pink, like that, orange. There you go, something like that. So there we go. We have created our script to allow the player to enter our trigger volume and press a button to turn on or off our light, but only when they are inside of our trigger volume. And we also display our helpful text as well, only when the player is inside the trigger volume. That is actually going to do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be working inside of the construction script here, if I can pronounce it, the construction script. That's where we're going to be creating some additional script to give us that extra layer of flexibility with our blueprints. So right now, what happens, anytime we make changes to our blueprint, so inside of our blueprint here, anytime we make changes to our blueprint, it's going to affect all instances of that blueprint in our level, which we may not want. We may want only the ability to press a button on this one back here, or we don't want the helpful text to show here, or we want this color of the light to be, or this light to be a different color, etc. We may want to have some flexibility in our blueprint. So we're going to do that inside of the construction script in the next video. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video.